As a follow-up to our video introducing Reverend Samuel Parris of Salem Village, let's take a closer look at religion in colonial Massachusetts. In 1692, most Massachusetts residents attended Puritan worship services in the local meeting houses, as they had from the colony's founding. However, the Puritan monopoly on faith in Massachusetts was slipping away by then, due to changes enforced by the kings of England.
On today's episode of Salem Witch Trials Daily, we're going to look at religion in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. I'm Sarah Jack.
And I'm Josh Hutchinson. When we think about religion in colonial Massachusetts, we think Puritans. While they did represent the majority, they were hardly the only Christian denomination in New England, where if one looked hard enough, one could find Catholics, Quakers, Baptists, and Anglicans.
So who were these Puritans, and what did they believe? Puritanism was born in England in the late 1500s. Puritans were Calvinists who wanted to remove all traces of Roman Catholicism from the Church of England. The term Puritan was a pejorative term used to deride the drive to purify the church.
Puritans wanted to transform society by first transforming themselves, adopting God's will as their own. As Calvinists, Puritans believed in predestination, that God had predetermined who would go to heaven.
Some Puritans were separatists who wanted to break from the Church of England altogether, while others wanted to reform the Church of England to remove what they believed were the vestiges of Catholicism, such as clerical vestments, stained glass, adornments of all kinds in churches, and kneeling to take communion.
The Plymouth Pilgrims were separatists, while the founders of Massachusetts Bay stated that they wanted to change the Church of England by establishing a pure church in New England, as an example for churches back in the mother country.
Massachusetts Puritans were Congregationalists. They believed local churches should make decisions about how to handle their own affairs rather than having matters decided for them by a bishop or the Pope.
The leaders of Massachusetts encouraged communities to hire teachers so that all people could read and understand the Bible.
According to early Governor John Winthrop, Massachusetts was founded as a city on a hill, a beacon to show other nations the path to righteousness and what could be achieved by embracing their Congregational or Puritan faith. Winthrop said there was a covenant between God and the people of Massachusetts, the Bible Commonwealth.
Massachusetts was viewed by some Puritans as a New Jerusalem. Massachusetts was technically not a theocracy, as ministers were prohibited from holding civil offices. However, the Puritan ministers certainly had the ear of the government and were highly influential in legislative affairs.
Early on, the Massachusetts Bay Colony was quick to banish, jail, or even execute non-Puritans or Puritans who weren't sufficiently orthodox in their beliefs and practices. In 1635, Massachusetts banished Salem minister Roger Williams for unorthodox beliefs. He founded the colony of Rhode Island and established the Baptist faith in North America. In 1638, Massachusetts banished Anne Hutchinson and John Wheelwright over disagreement on the path to salvation.
William Pynchon, the founder of Springfield, published a book called The Meritorious Price of Our Redemption in 1650. But in Massachusetts, the book was banned and burned as heretical. Under pressure, Pynchon returned to England in 1652.
In 1660, Massachusetts hanged 4 Quakers for promoting their faith. Mary Dyer was one of the unfortunate victims of this atrocity. She had earlier been a supporter of Anne Hutchinson and John Wheelwright.
In 1684, King James II revoked the 1629 charter, which had given Puritan Massachusetts the license to be a mostly self-governed colony.
Toleration came with the Dominion of New England in December 1686 and enhanced fears of spiritual decline and a turning away from the true faith. Anglicans, Baptists, and even Quakers, who were reviled by Massachusetts authorities, were allowed to worship freely in a move that threatened to lure good Puritans to heretical faiths.
In 1691, King William granted a new charter to Massachusetts, but this charter forced toleration to continue and removed the 1629 charter requirement that freemen be Puritans. This allowed others to be voting members of society. Quakers, for instance, once banned from public life, could now vote for their own representatives to the Massachusetts legislature, the General Court.
By 1692, preachers like Cotton Mather feared backsliding by the third generation. They revered the founding generation, the ones who arrived in the 1620s and 1630s to establish the colony. They worried the newer generations didn't have the faith of the founders, and events like losing the original charter had them very nervous about Massachusetts' future as a godly colony.
One thing that contributed to the fears of some of the ministers, but not others, happened back in 1657 when an assembly of ministers from both Connecticut and Massachusetts met to talk about church membership. They recommended the halfway covenant, which was slowly adopted by many Puritan congregations over the next several decades.
Ministers who did not adopt the halfway covenant wanted prospective members to confess their sins and share their conversion stories publicly in the meeting house, a prospect which frightened many potential church members.
When it was adopted by a church, the halfway covenant allowed children whose parents had been baptized to themselves be baptized, whether or not their parents were full church members. So, meaning if the grandparents were church members and had had the parents baptized, then the grandchildren could get baptized. By 1692, this measure had been adopted in Salem town, but not in Samuel Parris's Salem Village Church.
In an era when all people were expected to attend worship, whether the church had accepted them as members or not, Salem Village lagged behind in church membership. As we noted yesterday, when the witch panic began, only 61 residents had joined Reverend Parris at the village church. Some had retained their membership in churches of neighboring towns like Salem, Topsfield, and Beverly, but Dr. Emerson Baker estimates about 400 residents of the village of about 500 people had never been baptized or joined a church.
We want to point out that witch trials were not a uniquely Puritan project, and the Puritans were no more likely than other religious groups to execute people for witchcraft. At this point in time, virtually all Christians believed in witches, and people of a great many Christian denominations led witch hunts in Europe.
In Germany, Catholics and Lutherans burned alleged witches with equal fervor. In Scotland, the Calvinists of the Kirk of Scotland seemed to be especially zealous about killing supposed witches. The per capita rate of execution in Scotland was 10 times that of England.
Meanwhile, the witch trials in New England were primarily a Puritan on Puritan affair. Like the witch trials in Europe, this was people in one faith group accusing other people in their same faith group. This is co-congregants turning on each other. Interestingly, the non-Puritan colony of Rhode Island had no witch trials, while in Connecticut and Massachusetts, which were both Puritan colonies, witchcraft accusations were a recurring problem.
During the trials, the judges, some of whom occasionally preached, looked to the ministers for advice on how to proceed. Minister Cotton Mather counseled the judges to proceed with caution and be leery of spectral evidence, but to prosecute evildoers at a vigorous pace.
On the other hand, Reverend Samuel Willard opposed the trials, published a tract against them in secret, and may have helped some of the accused escape, including Captain John Alden, who was the son of Mayflower Pilgrim John Alden.
Ultimately, Cotton Mather's father, Increase Mather, may have had the most ministerial influence on ending the trials, having published Cases of Conscience Concerning Evil Spirits Personating Men, which criticized the use of spectral evidence in October 1692.
That's our report on religion in Massachusetts. And tomorrow we'll be back with some myths and folklore that have developed about the Salem witch trials.